Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro demands the United States to not interfere in the nation's internal affairs and stay out of the controversy of the Guayana Essequibo. In Guatemala, thousands reject the approval of the state's revenue and expenditure budget for the year 2024. And in the United Arab Emirates, Brazilian indigenous legislators propose an international articulation of parliamentarians so that the voice of indigenous peoples is heard in global discussions. Hello, welcome to From the South. I'm Luis Alberto Matos from the TeleSUR studios in Havana, Cuba. We begin with the news. In Venezuela, President Nicolas Maduro demanded that the United States stay out of the controversy over the Guayana Essequibo. In a message to the White House, President Maduro reaffirmed that the only valid instrument for the resolution of the territorial dispute is the Geneva Agreement, ratified by the Venezuelan people in the consultative referendum. In this context, Maduro celebrated that the participation in Sunday's electoral exercise exceeded 51%, demonstrating the social organization in defense of the territory under claim. In this regard, the head of state recognized the level of patriotic conscience of the Venezuelan electorate and the high level of consensus regarding the country's historical position in the territorial dispute. In this context, President Nicolas Maduro affirmed that the country's electoral system is the fastest and most reliable in the world.
How lucky we Venezuelans are to have an electoral system that is totally technological, fully guaranteed, secure, the most secure in the world, unique in the world. The work of TeleSUR Lucena, eternal glory to her memory. TeleSUR Lucena, a beloved woman of Venezuela. It was very fast to vote with.
Likewise, the Venezuelan president congratulated the Venezuelan people for their participation in the consultative referendum held on Sunday.
It was a very different vote from all the ones we have done. It is a very different vote. We have voted 30 times in 24 years. 30 times we have voted, and this is the most exciting vote that I remember as a personal experience. There you have this Sunday. I congratulate the people of Venezuela for this historic and heroic day.
In Guatemala, thousands of citizens have rejected their approval of the state's revenue and expenditure budget for the year 2024. Different sectors of society have asked the president, Alejandro Giammattei, to veto the decree. They affirmed that the consequences could be so serious that it would even lead to a default of the public debt. The ancestral authorities also protested this Monday against the approved budget. They assured that it affects the welfare and rights of millions of families, taking resources away from education and health to give them to obscure non-governmental organizations and to deputies and officials.
The debt draft has been a frequent modality in the last years. Global amounts has been authorized, but this time the Congress decides to authorize funds for specific projects or contract by means of a list. That what it does is to subtract the margin of maneuver of the new administration, since practically a great proportion of the Ministry of Communication is committed to pay this contract that unfortunately we know that they are not necessary about new projects. It might be that we will simply see expenditure executed but without any benefit for society, and that is the great problem of this approved budget, and that is that it responds to the particular interests of the Congress and its affinities and not necessarily to the needs of the country, and much less to the government program of new administration. So it is a quite negative budget in terms of quality of life. It is quite negative in terms of the quality of public spending because, as it was previously demonstrated with the budget expansion that was made last year for communications, also for a similar amount, there were not even project documents to justify the execution of this investment. However, the Congress gave them the go-ahead.
On Monday, the president of the Council of Ministers, Alberto Otarola, announced that the government had approved a decree amending the penal code to increase the penalties for demonstrators who block roads, disrupt public services, or occupy public infrastructure. Otarola pointed out that this amendment to the penal code increases the penalty for those who block roads or affect critical infrastructure such as ports and airports to 15 years in prison, but also penalizes the obstruction of public services and those who collaborate with the realization of disturbances. In these statements to the press, he pointed out that the penalties for those who block roads will range from 10 to 15 years in prison. Before explaining the scope of this decree, the head of the cabinet emphasized that the right to protest is constitutional in Peru, as long as it does not affect public or private property. Andrónico Rodriguez, president of the Senate of the plurinational state of Bolivia, calls for dialogue to solve the blockades in Chapare. Rodriguez is currently acting as head of state, while President Luis Arce takes part in the Mercosur summit to be held in Brazil. From the Casa Grande del Pueblo, the president of the Senate acknowledged the legitimate nature of the Chapare transporters' protests and demanded explanations from the relevant ministers. After expressing his concern for the people in the conflict zone, Rodriguez called for a dialogue to discuss solutions.
In regard to the demand for free transportation in the department of Cochabamba, several days of blockade causing much concern. At this time, mainly those who are on the Cochabamba-Santa Cruz road, we are quite concerned. We announced that 2 ministers have already been appointed to resolve this conflict through dialogue. We urge to resolve this conflict through dialogue.
On Monday, the Haitian Ministry of Health registered 729 cases of dengue fever, mostly in the west of the country. Health authorities analyzed 6,643 suspected cases with a positivity rate of 11%. The highest number of cases is registered in the West and Gran Anza departments, with 237 and 127 infected, respectively. For the moment, the Ministry of Health has not confirmed any death related to the disease. The World Health Organization estimates that every year some 50 million people are infected with the disease and 500,000 of them are at risk of contracting hemorrhagic dengue fever, which is potentially more deadly. Let's take a short break, but remember you can join us on TikTok at TeleSUR English, where you will find news in different formats, news updates, and much more. Other stories coming up. Stay with us. Welcome back from the South. In Palestine, local media highlighted Tuesday that despite the gradual restoration of communications and electricity services in Gaza, the Israeli siege was maintained from early hours. In this sense, authorities affirmed that the reconnection of Gaza with the world allows to show the genocide of the Israeli occupation army in the Gaza Strip. Meanwhile, the Ministry of Health confirmed that the Zionist forces attacked civilian populations in Khan Yunis, Rafah, and other areas in the south of Gaza, with a preliminary toll of 45 people killed and about 125 wounded. The World Health Organization denounces that Israel has given them 24 hours to withdraw their medical supplies from southern Gaza. WHO Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus said Monday that the Israeli army gave an order to withdraw their supplies from the medical warehouse they have located in the southern Gaza Strip. The Israeli authorities deny having given the evacuation order. However, the head of the UN Health Organization called for civilians and civilian infrastructure, including hospitals and humanitarian facilities, to be protected as mandated by the laws of war. The Gaza Health Ministry warned on Tuesday that the Israeli occupation forces may be planning a massacre against a hospital in the Gaza Strip. In this sense, Munir al-Burj, the general director of the Gaza's Ministry of Health, denounced that the hospital of Kamal Adwan in the north of Gaza is surrounded by Israeli tanks and snipers who shoot at anything that moves. Al-Burj also stressed that in the health center, in addition to a large number of wounded by the aggressions of the occupier and the regular patients, there are also more than 7,000 Gazans who take refuge from the Zionist barbarism. On behalf of the Ministry of Health, he emphasized that they fear that a massacre similar to those that occur in the hospitals Al-Shifa and Indonesia will take place. In Palestine, most of those killed by Israeli bombs are minors, while hundreds of thousands suffer the traumatic consequences of the war.
Many of the bodies in the plastic bags belong to children, children of mothers whose premature life were taken without any kind of regret. Children whose bodies were pulled from the rubble of buildings hit by Israeli airstrike that targeted a densely populated residential area.
We are from the Sayatun neighborhood. The street was completely destroyed. I pulled my brother's body out of the rubble. My grandmother and my mother were also pulled out from under the rubble. My brother's name was Mohammed Khalid Zeta.
Saad is one of the many little Palestinians who will be forever marked by the war. In tears, he bids farewell to his brother, who was killed under the walls of what was once his home. Sadly, these images are not the exception. Stories like Saad are multiplying throughout the Gaza territory. According to the Palestinian Ministry of Health and UNICEF, over 6,000 Palestinian children have been killed by the bombing of Israeli occupation.
Since today, Saturday morning, we have received a large number of casualties, mostly children. There are more than 15 bodies of children of 2, 8, and even 9 years of age. These innocent children are being bombed. Their bodies are in front of us, and we can see them. They were bombed while they were safe in their homes.
This infanticide is not an accepted consequence of the part of Israel, given that the attacks deliberately target 130 health institutions and put 20 hospitals and 46 health centers out of service, kill 280 health personnel in several regions of Gaza, and are daily bombing residential areas where many children live.
In India, 8 people died after Tropical Storm Michon made landfall along the country's southeastern coast on Tuesday. Meteorological authorities reported at least 8 deaths from the cyclone, which began to sweep across the coast of the state of Andhra Pradesh with maximum sustained winds of 100 km per hour and gusts of up to 110 km an hour. Rescue teams continue to evacuate people trapped by floods, as authorities added that there could be a storm surge and more heavy rains in the next 24 hours before the storm weakens. Another southern state, Tamil Nadu, experienced days of heavy rains ahead of the storm. The downpours have caused accidents that have killed at least 8 people in 4 vulnerable districts in recent days. We have information from East Africa as floods in Tanzania so far leave 63 people dead and many more missing. Prime Minister Kassim Majaliwa reported that 40 women and 23 men have died in Manyara province, one of the worst affected. There are also 110 confirmed injured and many missing. The premier told the media that it is one of the worst tragedies the country can remember and is feared that more bodies will be found under rubble. The nation's president, Samia Suluhu, has ordered a series of measures to assist families and mobilize them out of the disaster zone. The floods have severely affected agriculture. The world could exceed the 1.5 degrees Celsius warming threshold in just 7 years if carbon dioxide emissions continue to rise. This was warned by a study by the Global Carbon Project presented at the United Nations Climate Conference in Dubai. Fossil fuel pollution increased by 1.1% last year, according to research by this international consortium of scientists. The document warns that CO2 emissions from coal, gas, or oil will reach a new record in 2023. The Global Carbon Project especially targets China and India, the world's first and third largest emitters of greenhouse gases, where the growing demand for energy is outpacing the deployment of renewable sources. COP28 must define the future of fossil fuel use. We have a second short break coming up, but before we invite you to join our WhatsApp community for our English-speaking audience, you can scan the QR code on screen to join directly and share the link to reach more people. constant news coverage of Latin America and the Caribbean as well as the rest of the world. Stay connected and informed with TeleSUR. For a short break, don't go away. Welcome back from the South. A Greenpeace report linking premature death to oil companies' exploitation of fossil fuels was released at COP28. Activists are now calling for a complete phase-out of fossil fuels and for governments and world leaders to hold all fossil fuel development and hold companies accountable. Greenpeace Netherlands released a research study at COP28 in Dubai claiming that a single year of emissions from 9 major European oil and gas companies could cause 360,000 premature deaths related to climate and temperature change. The study is based on the self-reported 2022 emission of Shell, BP, TotalEnergies, Equinor, Repsol, Eni, OMV, Orlen, and Wintershall Dea. Speaking at the UN Climate Summit, climate activist Vanessa Nakate called for a ban on fossil fuels, saying that it is time to hold the fossil fuel industry accountable.
And now we hear with this Greenpeace report that 9 big European oil and gas companies are responsible for the deaths of about 360,000 people, and this is just in 2022. Fossil fuel companies unknowingly pursuing an immoral business model that has lethal consequences, particularly for those in vulnerable communities in the global south.
On Tuesday, the United Arab Emirates Brazilian indigenous legislator proposed an international articulation of parliamentarians so that the voice of the indigenous peoples is heard in global discussions. On the occasion of the celebration of the Indigenous Peoples Day at the United Nations Conference on Climate Change, the indigenous delegation from Brazil walked through the streets of Dubai to gain access to the venue where the event is taking place. Indigenous peoples point out that the solution to the climate crisis requires respect for the ancestral customs of the native peoples. They also pointed out that the protection of Aboriginal communities is indispensable for the world since they are responsible for 80% of the planet's biodiversity. In Doha, the capital of Qatar, Gulf Cooperation Council Summit opened, where the Gaza conflict is expected to be at the top of the agenda. In the presence of the leaders of Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, Oman, and Turkey, the Emir of Qatar, Sheikh Tamim bin Ahmad Al Thani, delivered the opening speech of this meeting. The event attracts special regional and global attention for several reasons in the current Middle East context. 3 of its members are signatories of the normalization agreements with Israel, some of them suspended after the genocidal operation against Gaza, and the Emir is the host who has led the humanitarian truce agreements and the president of Turkey who will sue Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu before international courts. On Monday, the presidents of Iran, Sayed Ibrahim Raisi, and Cuba, Miguel Diaz-Canel, met in Tehran, the Persian capital, and agreed on the creation of a global front for the defense of Palestine. During the visit of the Cuban head of state, the first in 20 years by a president of the island, the presidents condemned the U.S. intervention and reiterated that the Palestinian people are defending their land. They coincided in questioning the role of international humanitarian organizations in the face of the brutal Zionist aggression. The Iranian head of state added that it is urgent to correct the existing world order, while his Cuban counterpart reaffirmed the urgent need for global mobilization.
We have expressed the common will of Iran and Cuba to make the most urgent efforts to achieve in the international community a rejection and strong condemnation of the genocide committed against the Palestinian people, the murder of thousands of people, including children and women, to demand for an immediate ceasefire and to create the conditions for the creation of a state of Palestine.
The Iranian president also stressed the strategic importance of relations between Iran and Cuba.
The visit of the president of Cuba to Iran after 21 years is a very important visit, and we consider it as a turning point in the growing bilateral relations between the two brotherly peoples of Iran and Cuba.
On Tuesday, the Nigerian military confirmed that its air force mistakenly killed at least 85 people in the north-central part of the country, mistaking them for a group of terrorists. The events, initially denied by the military hierarchy, took place in the town of Tudun Birin in Kaduna State, where the celebration of the birth of the Prophet Muhammad, known as Maulud Nabi, was taking place. According to the State Interior Minister, the army carried out the operation during the night hours, leaving not only dead but also wounded. The commander of the 1st Division, Vu Okoro, limited himself to saying that they were carrying out an operation against terrorists and unintentionally affected members of the community. On Tuesday, Burkina Faso and Niger formalized their withdrawal from the G5 Sahel anti-terrorist organization. The governments of Ouagadougou and Niamey joined the decision initially taken by Mali in May 2022. In a joint statement sealing the definitive separation, they affirmed that participation in the G5 is not compatible with the path of dignity and independence they have decided to take. The G5 was created in 2014 by 5 countries that agreed to deploy their forces to fight terrorism in the Sahel, with the withdrawal of France. With this decision, only Chad and Mauritania remain in the organization. Like this, we have come to the end of this news brief, but before saying goodbye, we want to thank our Caribbean audience, especially the audience of Trinidad and Tobago. We are pleased to share our newscast and contribute to provide an alternative news source of the latest world events. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. You can also join us on social media, Facebook, X, Instagram, Telegram, and TikTok. For TeleSUR English, I'm Luis Alberto Matos. Thank you for watching.
For me,